Hello and welcome to Rehydrate. This season we'll be reading and discussing Leo Shishin's The Dark Forest, book number 2 of the Remembrance of Earth Past series. This is season 3, episode 4, Natural Selection. We'll be discussing the first third of part 3. In season 1, we talked about the three-body problem, and the hosts have varying levels of knowledge on this book and the rest of the series. My name is Dan, and I've read the entire series.
This is Tim, and I've only read up to this week's chapters.
This is Amin, and I've only read up to this week's chapter as well. And I also co-host the Rehydrate spoiler cast with Dan and Talia, so if you've read the entire series or don't care about spoilers, you should check that out as well.
So this week we have one follow-up from one of our listeners, Frank. He is the one who gave us the information about Tyler's original plan that involved ball lightning. He did it as a follow-up, and I'll read his feedback here. Was glad to hear that the host noted the stereotypes in different national representatives in the PDC meetings, like how during the meeting when Heinz was first revealed the mental seal, the German representative conspicuously silent instead of vehemently speaking out against mind control. I think it was almost certainly done deliberately. The national stereotyping doesn't stop at representatives. My favorite example is in the next chapter when Tyler made his request. Heinz joked that, watch out, his next request might be for a space carrier. I took it as a jab at the fact that the U.S. had more aircraft carriers than anyone else in the world, and moreover, when The Dark Forest was written in 2008, China had no carriers. Was Leo jealous? Maybe. Pure speculation, though. Tim, you had mentioned that before about the noticing the kind of national stereotypes in the PDC. Not unnoticed by some of our listeners here.
Yeah, I don't know if that was intentional on the author's part or not, but I suppose it could be. Like he's maybe just having some fun with the reputations of other countries, and kind of interesting to see how he might view how the U.S. might be viewed from a Chinese perspective.
Yeah, not just the U.S., but like the entire world, right? Like how they're viewed. It's interesting. And Frank had one more note of feedback, and he said, one of the hosts mentioned that ball lightning was too theoretically advanced. Worry not, in Leo's universe, the discovery and application of ball lightning takes place in ball lightning, whose timeline is years before the Sofa unlock. Thus, even before the Trisolar invasion and the Sofa unlock, humans can still use sophisticated ball lightning weapons. I'm pretty sure Leo made a decision. It was Leo, not Martinson, who wrote up the new plan, changed what's in the English edition purely because no Dark Forest reader in the English-speaking world would understand Tyler's plan in the original edition. I think this is based off a comment that we had if he would come up with that ball lightning plan if it was Joel Martinson just came up with that, but it seems like Leo Shishin himself wrote that. But I did notice one interesting thing, and I mentioned it on the spoiler cast. When I looked at the book for Ball Lightning book, it was actually translated by Joel Martinson. I mean, it came later, but the Joel Martinson, the same person who did the translation for Dark Forest, did it for Ball Lightning too. So pretty interesting that he forewent that plan, but not eventually did the translation. All right, so let's just jump into the summary for this episode. So we start with Luigi waking up for hibernation and find himself 170 years into the future, cured of his illness. Humanity has significantly progressed from the time that he's been asleep. They moved largely into underground cities. Every aspect of the environment seems to be personalized and connected, and have a large fleet of spaceships that can travel up to 15% the speed of light. People in this era believe that because of this progress, and the fact that the Trisolarans seem to have slowed down, even stopped, except for a probe, that they'll have no choice but to enter peace talks once they arrive. Luigi also gets a recap of all the events that have happened to humanity in the past 170 years. Humanity focused all their efforts and resources on defeating the Trisolarans, plunging humanity into a period called the Great Ravine, where billions starved and died. Humanity eventually decides that the cost of this preparation is not worth the human cost, and instead refocuses on the needs of the people, ultimately leading to the technological breakthroughs. There's also been a major political realignment where space fleets breaking off and forming 3 independent nations. Another relic of the Common Era that didn't survive is the Wallfacer program, but few people who even remember it think of it as an ancient joke. At a time, humanity was easily scared. The Space Fleet Joint Council now oversees the Wallfacer program, officially ends the program, and returns Luigi and Heinz to be ordinary citizens. A remnant of the past that does still exist, however, is the malware that the ETO installed over a century ago called Killer 5.2, and turns technology against Luigi on multiple occasions and tries to kill him. Because he's now joined by our old friend Dasher, he's saved from being killed numerous times. Heinz, also freed from being a wall facer, has his own bad day when his wife Keiko reveals herself as being his wall breaker. She tells the SFJC that not only was Heinz's plan from the start to build the mental seal, but he also built 4 other machines in secret, which may be still operational today. Furthermore, in secret, he changed the operation of the machines not to implant a faith in victory, but to imprint an unshakable defeatist and escapist mindset, a belief that Heinz himself imprinted on himself. Finally, Zhang Beihai is also awoken from hibernation, where the current commanders of the Space Fleet need to find commanders they can trust who are not imprinted by the mental seal. And since Zhang Beihai was already shown to be a triumphalist, they decided to temporarily give him control of the ship Natural Selection while they conduct their investigation into who has been imprinted. However, as they're handing over control, they're all shocked to learn that Zhang himself is actually an escapist, and his plan all along was to take control of his ship and escape the solar system as fast as possible. So I also want to kind of go over some of the new characters that were introduced. So we're introduced to Xiong Wen, who is Lois G's roommate when he wakes up from hibernation, kind of gives him the lay of the land. We're introduced to Ben Jonathan, who is the special commander for the Solar Fleet Joint Council, or SFJC. We're introduced to Dongfen Yanshu, who is the original captain of the Natural Selection, and Zhang Yan, who is Zhang Yancho's grandson and lives close to Xiaoming, who is Dasher's son. Starting from this point, we're going to get a lot of ships, a lot of spaceships, and they have all interesting names, and I want to also keep those kind of straight. So I want to introduce those two. The main one is the Natural Selection, the warship that Zhang Beihai is given command of and eventually takes over and sends and makes it escape into space. Blue Shadow, which is a small called Spacer Racer, launched from the Pacific, and it set the stellar bombs to form the cloud to detect a Trisolaran probe. And we're also introduced to the Pacific, which is a giant spaceship which delivered the stellar bombs from Neptune. So the first question I had for Tim and Amin is, this chapter, hopefully you guys weren't spoiled on it, but the title of it is like Crisis Era Year 205 or something, right? It's a really hard cut into the future from what's later called the Common Era. Common Era is, from the original time. So it's a really hard cut. I guess, was that off-putting to you guys? Would you have liked to see the time filled in, or do you like the structure where we kind of hear about like the quote-unquote past, like the Great Ravine and the times leading up to that?
For me, this was a really welcome choice for him to make this jump. I really would have been less interested if it was like every 20 years or something, some interstitial bit of story. I suppose not unexpected, because I knew vaguely that like at some point we were going to get to the future, but I was surprised at how much had changed and how much this at least at this point, up to where we've read, it almost seems like he's negated or made irrelevant like so much of like what has come up, like the first half of the book essentially. We spent so much time on the wall facers. The concept always seemed a little silly to me, but as we had discussed earlier, like those are really long kind of chapters that were a little bit of a slog to get through, even though there's like interesting stuff in there. But yeah, this like kind of like jump to the future where it's like everybody's like, oh, that wall facer thing, boy, that was stupid, wasn't it? Was kind of kind of mirrored my feelings on it. It was like, wow, that's a bold choice. Yeah, I mean, as far as like, I'd say the most entertaining section I've read up in the series up to this point, or at least the most like page turny section, just because it seems like he was having a lot of fun, like finally getting to like unleash his future, or give us a look at his future.
Totally.
And yeah, like, I mean, obviously what remains to be seen, like, is everything that like in the first half of the book, completely irrelevant. I say mostly irrelevant because obviously like Zhang Dahai, like impacts the story, here and steals a ship.
Yeah, I'd say Heinz's plan is also really impactful, right? Like it wasn't the plan that he said, but like now it's like a huge story point in the future. Like, oh man, not only like do we have like a whole bunch of secret people who with like the mental seal, but it's actually like the opposite of what we thought it was. So yeah, I would say it's not irrelevant. I mean,
not irrelevant, but
seem to see like it's like what is that guy doing? He just like wasted time and then had a quote unquote spell.
Yeah, obviously that's the big question, I guess, for me, is just why the continued focus on him as like the protagonist. Is what's the point of him right now?
Yeah.
I like this jump too. I thought this world building was a lot more interesting than the Zhang part of this section.
Hmm.
I understand that's moving the plot forward, but in terms of I guess the science fiction part of it, I thought it was interesting. I thought the underground cities were an interesting idea, and I thought the one thing in here that was clever was they were able to collect interest on their bank accounts, and
Yeah.
because everything leads back to Futurama. It reminded me of the episode of Futurama where Fry finds out he's a billionaire because he had $1 in his bank account 1,000 years ago, and
And he buys the anchovies.
understandably, yeah, yes, yeah, and 200 years of interest isn't quite a billion X or 4 billion X what it was, but just little things like that I think are neat in terms of how they're doing the world building. And then the other thing that I'm sure this was obvious to everyone except me, but this also kind of reminded me of in the first book, The Three Body Problem, when bad times were coming, people would just dehydrate and just wait until things were better.
Hmm.
And this is kind of, them going into hibernation is kind of similar, where they're like, oh, we'll just sit this out until we're through the Great Ravine or whatever it might be. So
Oh,
I like this part.
that's interesting. I never put that together, but yeah, it's sort of like the human equivalent of dehydrating.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, they didn't know that those times are coming. They're kind of just going to the future, but like
Yeah.
but it's not just the wall facers who are hibernating because like the other guy, the Loju's roommate, Shung Wen, he also he hibernated
Yeah,
because he knew the bad times were coming, right?
yeah, and Dasher's son hibernated as well. I don't know why he did, but
I think that was his own personal problem, right? Because he spent
yeah,
some time in
by
prison
prison.
and yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So anyway, I thought that parallel was again, I thought it was obvious to everyone, but maybe
No,
not. Yeah.
that's a good catch. I did not catch that. So that's a cool parallel there. And hibernation, yeah, it's kind of it's a big it's a very often used concept to the rest of the series. So
Yeah, I'm surprised that between the fact they're able to collect interest on their, and also that they were able to hibernate that long, even through the Great Ravine here. Like I'm surprised at the sort of institutional consistency humanity seemed to have. That
yeah,
given what they described about the Great Ravine, like it seems like there's a chance that maybe somebody just shuts off. Like why are we keeping these people frozen? There's probably a lot of energy here. Like maybe just shut these off, and or some calamity. And maybe it did happen that some did get shut off, or some things got destroyed or whatever. But
yeah, or forgotten, right? Because like they talk
yeah,
about that
or
one guy.
forgotten.
Yeah, that one guy who was buried like way down in that mine. And he was like,
Yeah,
well, my ancestors will pick me up, and then they just forgot about him totally, like just like kind
yeah,
of grew over. So yeah, I always like even like in like real world hibernation, like where they freeze your brain or whatever.
yeah.
It always seemed like yeah, like there's no guarantee that like they're gonna like wake you up, in the future. So yeah,
Yeah.
I think similar here.
Well, yeah, and despite how terrible the Great Ravine seemed to be, there is some sort of positivity here that, like, yeah, like humanity has like sort of kept their institutional shit together to like maintain hibernation all these years and maintain baking systems and
Yeah.
sort of like respect the sort of contracts and rules of law, over 200 years and all this.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting, like how they have so many laws around hibernation, like around they had like special rules around, because they had said like, well, normally like all the bank accounts are kind of wiped out for people who during the Great Ravine, but for hibernators specifically, they have a law saying like, oh, that didn't count, so your interest kept accruing and like you don't lose your money. And then they also had rules around like seniority, right? That was a big deal. Like they're not older than than they were in hibernation, so yeah, although kind
Right.
of the societal rules, like where hibernation is kind of a common thing, it is interesting how they built that up.
Yeah, it seems like he thought this part through pretty well.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I think that again, this is like playing to his strengths. I think as somebody who thinks through these like societal like consequences of what things might realistically be like, with these sci-fi concepts in place. Overall, found this pretty entertaining, especially the way he talks about how humanity like partially because of the Great Ravine, but yeah, decided to kind of focus on taking care of themselves
yeah,
and I don't know if this is like a commentary in his point, but like as a like I guess a happy accident. Like it seems like all of the reasons they feel like they're able to take on, that they have these ships and they're able to take on the Trisolarans is like because they stopped caring so much about taking on the Trisolarans.
Right. Yeah, exactly. They're saying like, yeah, everyone focused so hard on it, and then as soon as like they stopped caring about it, then all the technical explosion happened, and then they got back to it like, oh, I guess we can just take care of the Trisolarans now too while we're at it.
Yeah, so maybe I don't know if this is like societal or commentary on his point, that if you like, I imagine prior to the Great Ravine, like you would have had a pretty authoritarian and tunnel vision society to sort of focus so hard on that. I mean,
Yeah,
maybe that's maybe it's a sort of metaphor for like say China or something, under, like communist rule or sort of more authoritarian rule, got really smoggy cities and a lot of, like ecological problems as of, the US and capitalism is, produces these sorts of problems by in its own means. But
yeah. I also thought it was interesting that he kind of took another jab at environmentalists and be like, like, well, during the time, like environmentalism was kind of treated the same as treason because like, you're protecting the planet for the Trisolarans, and so like that's why they didn't
right.
care about the environment getting all destroyed and like they had to move underground. So there was a lot of talk about that in Three Body Problem. So here again, it's like another jab at like Greenpeace and environmental organizations. Yeah, I mean, when I first read this chapter, like I was like super into like the first discussion of it, like just like the hard cut, like I was really into it. Like, hearing all like the new future technology, especially like when Logi wakes up, oh, electricity is like unlimited and everywhere. We don't have to worry about it. And like the underground cities and then when they got into like talking about like the future, quote unquote, future history, right? They talked about the Great Ravine and all this stuff. Like I am like very much into that stuff. So, and it was also, I thought, cool, like how even despite like his like fascination with like the new technology, that's actually not that great. Like they're like, oh, actually, we had inductive charging back in our time. Now it's just a little bit better. And the personalized like stuff is like, well, it's not really that personalized. Like their AI still hasn't really advanced to the point where they can have completely AI driven conversations. Yeah, because the SOFA unlock is still blocking this progress. So it's kind of, even like where it seems fantastical, it's still kind of rooted in reality because of the SOFA unlock really blocking like really exponential progress there.
Yeah, that's how I took it too, that it was kind of the SOFA unlock there, like it does feel like it's very much like extrapolated from like current history, where like the only way we seem to be able to technologically, advance is with bigger and better screens and more social media and more sort of like, like interconnectedness just, via media. And now we're in a future where like, yeah, where there's just screens everywhere and everything is everybody's got a TV on their clothes. And
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys thought that, thought the same, but this does seem to be kind of like modern social media just taken to like further extreme, where it's like this is what humanity's good at and what all we can like do. So
Right.
this is
Yeah.
how we're
Basically,
going to
like,
progress. Yeah,
yeah, we forgot to the point where you can have Instagram on your jacket now.
yeah.
Great.
Like we are still building interstellar ships, or not
Yeah.
quite interstellar. 15% of the, so that seems pretty good. Like,
Yeah. I mean, it's better than the Trisolarans, right? Like the Trisolarans, I think they said only what 10%, or was it 5% the speed of light? I forgot. I think it's 10%. And humanity is super proud of it, right? Like we have more ships than the Trisolarans now. They can go faster than the Trisolarans. So like
right.
they're gonna have no choice. And like plus like they're already slowing down through the stellar cloud. So like they're gonna have no choice but to negotiate peace with us because they're gonna be kind of limping towards the solar system when they get here.
Yeah, I guess that remains to be seen. Is humanity really overconfident? And they're interpreting that the apparent slowdown of the Trisolarans in the probe as like weak or something, or they're weakening. Like I don't know if that's necessarily the case at this point. Maybe they're just maybe they've somehow observed what's going on and they're slowing down and reformulating plans, or
I mean, who knows, right? But there's only one ship that's able to make it here. So like, how much can that do?
right.
One of the things that struck out to me, and obviously this was written before the pandemic, but when he's going in and going in for his final meeting, I think his doctor tells him that remote meetings are commonplace now. Taking part in this way won't affect the meeting's importance or seriousness, Jonathan said.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
all of us who have been working or in school for the last year have been participating in remote meetings. And I'm just curious what your experiences have been in terms of the effectiveness of those meetings when they are remote. Again, I know he was kind of he didn't know this was going to happen when he wrote this. So I just thought that was an interesting perception of the future where this is going to become more common. So I agree with the first part of that. The second part about it won't affect the meeting's importance or seriousness is,
Yeah.
to me, is very fictional still.
I don't know, like, because like Congress has meetings now. Like we saw, like they have like Senate committee meetings or whatever that have TV screens on them. I'm sure you guys have all seen like court proceedings that have been online with like different things. So it seems like they're being treated kind of equally. Given, I don't know that's going to be true the post pandemic, right? Like if we're going to go back to everything has to be in person, and the online ones won't be treated the same. But maybe it's a shift in thinking, where online meetings will be the same. Yeah, it's an interesting question. I don't know. For me personally, my work was always kind of remote anyway. Like our team is very distributed across the country, so meetings basically haven't changed for me. It's just a matter of like where I take them. So yeah, me personally, I think it didn't really have too much of an impact work wise. The acceptance, I guess, of these remote meetings has increased, but yeah, like I said, it's to be seen if that remains post pandemic.
But yeah, it does seem pretty prescient.
Yeah.
Like again, this just seems to be like the extreme example of where we seem to be moving, where everything happens remotely and everything happens electronically and in the cloud. And the cloud is like now, I guess, all around you.
Yeah, even in toilet paper.
Yeah. Yeah, the Internet of Things, like everything. Yeah, the Internet of everything.
So, I mean, what do you think? Do you think the world is going to be, is this an inflection point for the world, or are we just going to go back?
Today, like 2021?
Do you think, like, because of the pandemic, like, do you think now we're at a point of like now remote meetings are going to be accepted as a practice going forward, or post pandemic we're just going to go back to the point where we were before, where the online meetings are not really treated seriously?
I think very little is going to change permanently because of this. I think a lot of what's going to happen in the next 6 months through the end of 2021 is going to be companies and schools and everyone trying to get back to 2019 to pre-pandemic. So I would love in 200 years for all of our meetings to be online, but I don't think that's going to be the norm pretty soon. I think it's going to become an option now, and it wasn't an option before. But I think for the most part, companies that like doing stuff in person are going to continue to do things in person, and they're just going to consider 2020 an anomaly, not anything that's actually going to be an inflection point.
I think probably. I mean, I think the most realistic thing that's going to happen is like post when the time where we can meet back in person. Like there's going to be an overcorrection towards in person, right? Because everyone's going to be like, oh, remember the good old days when we could be in person, right? And then they're going to like overcorrect towards that, right? Maybe hopefully like a couple years down the road, they're like, oh, remember during the pandemic that was awesome how we could have meetings. We don't have to like drive an hour to like to a meeting. So like maybe like there'd be more opportunities for that. Who knows though, right?
It's hard for me to not think that like work from home is just going to be normalized a lot more.
Yeah.
We may go back to like a lot more meetings in person, but even just the way, I mean, at least in like software company, like work, like so much of it is already prior to the pandemic, was already being done offshore, like
Yeah.
with teams in different countries and contractors and all that. So having a lot of remote meetings even prior to pandemic, and I think given the amount that companies have had to adapt, set work from home policies and set that infrastructure, and also coming to the realization that it's not as bad as they thought, or people are as productive as home from home as possible.
Right.
They were as productive as from home as they were in the office in most parts. Like I think it will be shift. I can't see anything just because everybody's got a significant taste of it now. But I do think things will somewhat go back to normal, just because I think there's enough people who kind of want to go back to that.
I think it's going to depend on like, can the companies make more money off of people being at home? Like, can they save money on not,
Yeah.
running offices and that kind of thing? And that's going to be the determining factor, not are workers more efficient or happy. They don't care. It's like just gonna be like, can we make more money? Can we save costs by not running offices or doing things online? That's gonna be the ultimate driving factor, probably. So one more thing on the future I want to talk about was the political changes that happened, because from the jump, initially it seemed like it's not a lot of change. Like some countries merged, and some languages also kind of like they talked a lot about like how Chinese and English kind of made one language, and they talk about ancient Chinese where they just speak Chinese, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the biggest change that happened was the space fleets kind of taking over, becoming their own nation state in their own way, and and not only just one, but like three of them, right? They have the European, the North American, and the Asian fleet, becoming their own collective nation, and then having their own like UN on part of that. So I thought that was an interesting way, and I think we've seen that in other sci-fi where the fleets kind of take over.
Yeah, I guess I'm still a little like fuzzy on the relationship between like the space fleets and like Earth. I think he mentioned that like Earth, like nations on Earth aren't so much of a thing anymore, or at least don't really have like or more like the space fleets are not like, they are separate political entities, but they sort of like still like assert kind of control over like or not so much control, but it seems like countries on Earth have like allegiance to one of the space fleets, probably given where they're at, right?
I think they came from there originally. That's why they're called the North American and European and Asian fleets. But I think, to me, the way I read it was they're just totally separate now, and they're just like different countries, and it's sort of like the EU, right, where they have like their
Right.
own like union, and that's what the SFJC is, where the Solar Fleet Joint Council, they have like their own kind of internal one, but then like I don't know if the UN still exists or something like that, but like it seems like they're treated kind of equally as like the United States or China, and then these are just other countries, but they happen to be non-terrestrial. They happen to be just in space. So that's the way I read it.
But it seems to be like a European country on still on Earth would kind of have like an allegiance to the European space fleet, or at least like root be like loyal to them, maybe the way you're loyal to a sports team or something like that.
Yeah, it could
But
be.
like there's an unspoken thing that you should be kind of loyal to your space fleet or whatever.
And they probably run their quote unquote countries, similar to how they, from the origin they came from, right? Because like Asian countries will run their countries a little bit differently than European ones. So it's probably just more natural to, if you're going to move into space, then you'd probably move to, I would move to the North American fleet or whatever, right? They
Right.
would speak English. They would, have similar ideas and philosophies and kind of stuff. But it's interesting, like how powerful they became and how separate they are from. Because like they talked about like how they don't want to interfere in terrestrial politics anymore. They just kind of deal with their own thing. The next thing was talking about Luo Ji. Let's just get into his story a little bit, and what is his purpose now? It's pretty funny how he wakes up and like everyone's like, oh yeah, there's that one Chinese guy who cast a spell. Like, what the hell is that? Like, and then he also thinks it's kind of funny where he's just an ancient joke now, and then he's trying to find his way in the world, and like he has no wall facer powers anymore. So I guess like any ideas like what his purpose now is, or does he even have a purpose?
Well, yeah, I think that's an ongoing mystery. I mean, obviously, the Trisolarans wanted to kill him, so that like 200 years prior, fallout from that still exists today. Like I thought that was, as an aside, like I thought that was a pretty neat concept of, oh, now that he's awake, this dormant, this dormant virus, awakens and like tries to
Yeah.
kill him like Final Destination style, with in a bunch of different ways. But
It was funny how it kept getting more and more ridiculous. Like, like,
yeah,
oh, like he almost fell in the manhole, and then it ends up with like him
yeah,
just getting murdered by a couch.
yeah.
Yeah, the couch one was ridiculous, but I laughed.
Yeah. No, that was pretty good. Yeah, as far as his purpose now, I guess it remains to be seen. It's like it's obviously wouldn't have invested so much like narrative time in him to like just say like, yeah, he doesn't mean anything now. Like he's just like an observer, or he's just like the reader stand-in, for what's going on. So like he's got to have some plot purpose that's obviously still tied to like why they wanted to kill him. But what that is, like, who know? I don't know at this point. This whole spell thing seemed pretty like silly in retrospect, and the whole wall facer thing seemed pretty silly in retrospect. But maybe that it's going to have some unintended consequence.
Yeah, it seemed to have
But
only unintended consequences so far, right? Like the first of all, like Diaz and Tyler just wasted a bunch of money, and then
yeah,
their plans had no strategic value afterwards. And they were saying like Diaz's plan wouldn't even worked. Like no matter they wouldn't have been enough for Mercury to fall in there.
right,
And Heinz, his plan had consequence, but it was only unintended ones because the imprinted. We'll talk about that in a bit. Luigi just like wasted a bunch of people's time and money, and then didn't
right.
really do anything. So it's interesting, like how they talk about it as like a vestige of how people are just so scared during the beginning of the crisis era.
I had a bigger question about what Dasher's still doing around, other than being his guardian and kind of being his guide, like taking him up to the surface and giving him a history lesson.
Yeah,
Dasher just seems to be answering the reader's questions, I guess, about what happened in the past, and I know he doesn't answer all the questions directly, but he puts him in situations where those questions can be answered either by his son or whomever else. So
yeah,
to me, that's I know the plot wouldn't work without Dasher, but I wish he had a other role besides being his guardian and his guide. I guess a lot of the characteristics that he had in the first book that I did not find all that charming. He still has some of those, but other than that, I think he's become a much flatter character for me.
yeah. I mean, I took it as he got leukemia because like a work related thing. When he took down the ETO and then got exposed to the radiation when he shot the bomb. And so he just went into hibernation, right? And then so when they woke up all the people from the common era, they're like, when they wanted to get rid of the wall facer program, then they're like, oh, just wake up everybody as part of that era, right? And Dasher is kind of part of that. And because of that, he was able to get cured from leukemia and then, I guess, liver disease while they're at it. He just happened to know Luigi, and that's how they kind of got together, and kind of continued. Like, it's not, he doesn't have an official capacity of trying to protect him, but maybe just old habits.
Kind of feels like he's the author's like pet character or like the mascot for the series.
Yeah, maybe.
He's just kind of this ever present. Yeah, he's the only carryover from the previous book and still here with us. So I did like how Luigi like just kind of had this big like hard reset in like everything that he like cares about. I guess. I mean, I think he still like cares about his like wife and like child, but
Right.
yeah, he's just like a total fish out of water. Yeah, like all of like I mean, I guess it's just like all of that like kind of like goofy purple prose and parts about him, falling into the ice and having this like epiphany. It seemed pretty silly at the time, and I was like kind of hoping, like, man, I hope this isn't really what the book is about. Him and his special insight being the thing that saves humanity. It seems like the author like threw all that out. Too. Maybe that was a big red herring or something like that, and that's just pretty amusing to me right now. Like maybe
Yeah.
it all comes around again, and like obviously he's got some sort of purpose, I guess, like because he's still, I guess, the protagonist. But
Yeah, I mean, it could be just he's just like turned into the audience surrogate because they always have that character comes in and doesn't really know. You have to have the audience like kind of connect with somebody because he's been the main character throughout the first half of the book, right? Now it's like, well, we still know this guy, and he's learning this stuff at the same time we're learning this stuff. So that might be just his role now.
I suppose, yeah, but it's just kind of like that's a bold narrative choice to just kind of spend so much of the first half of the book
Yeah.
on him, and then yeah, just kind of shift like this and say like all of these I don't know what the right word is, but these like narrative conceits that he was like building up, he just kind of like, boy, that was silly, wasn't it? Anyway, the future.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, maybe that's the point, right? Like maybe they're
yeah.
just trying to say like how ridiculous like we were during the common era, right? And so like his ridiculousness, like even though we were so invested in it, it was just part of that.
Yeah, that's kind of at the back of my head what I've been thinking. Like, I don't think like things were always going to like play out the way you kind of think they were. Like especially after this cut here, like I'm not so sure there's ever going to be like a big battle between or like I would be actually surprised, maybe a little disappointed if it just ended up like, oh, there's Trisolarians is eventually going to get here, and the story is going to be this interstellar, battle between the two. I think he's going to throw us for a loop, at least one, again throughout the end of this series. I certainly don't think things are going to play out the way it seems like they would at the beginning, at the first half of this book. Wall facers are these agents that, figure out the way to defeat the Trisolarans, and only one of them maybe succeeds, or one or two of them succeeds. But in hindsight, especially after this, it does seem pretty silly. It's like in the moment while I'm reading it, it's like, oh, this is kind of silly. I don't know, but this is what the book's about. So let's see where this goes.
I mean, I would say at least the first half of this book was more. It was more focused on society's reaction to a big crisis, knowing that aliens exist and then knowing that aliens are coming, and what our current thinking would be like if some event like that happened, and spinning up programs like the wall phaser program, which seems like it's a big waste of time and a big waste of resources, and there's even bigger consequences to that too, right? Basically it's crimes against humanity, crimes against people's autonomy. So those are not only was it a waste of time, but it was a kind of a big infringement on people's rights and humanity in general. Maybe it's just a commentary on that, which I think is super interesting in its own right? How a society would react.
Yeah, it's hard to think of any version of modern society, or even alternate modern society, our society, coming up with something like the wall facers. That just seems very I don't know, JRPG to me, or something like that, where it's just this, this 5 people, or these 4 people, or
right,
be
especially
humanity's heroes. Yeah.
Especially people who aren't in power already. It would probably just be the current president, the leaders of each individual nation would come up with some plan, and then they would fight about that plan, and then we would just do what we're going to do anyway. Maybe the U.S. would just do it itself, and China would have their own plan, and Russia would have their own plan, and just like the pandemic, right? We didn't really, as a world, didn't do things in a coherent way that would made it easier for us to kind of come out of it. Is we else kind of did our own things.
Right. Yeah, I think the author is more confident than I am in ultimately
in the power of the UN, right?
The power of the UN and the humanities. Even though we still have these 3 different fleets and all that. Obviously, even within Asia or Europe, or if there's going to be friction there, especially Asia. But I mean, currently, despite we having these 3 fleets, they don't seem to be in the present state in the book at war with each other.
Yeah, it does seem
so.
We're all kind of all the countries are kind of coming back to the idea of well, let's just let's just finish the Trisolaran thing off, and then we'll be done with it, right?
Or given that there seems to be shared, they all have fleets, and there seems obviously there's been shared technology between them. It's not one is far more powerful than the other, or the other is just a fledgling space program.
There does seem to be a rivalry, though, who's going to be able to, which fleet is going to intercept the Trisolaran probe first, though. That seems to be the only point of contention, right?
Right.
Yeah, that's what I took it as, is they're competing strategically, not technologically, like Tim said. But again, I don't know to what end.
And it's a lot more optimistic than I would be, given that I don't think it's hard for me to imagine that these space fleets be these I don't know, secular nation states or something like that. I mean, I just think it's just going to be just obviously corporate entities that eventually end up.
Right.
It's just going to be it's just going to be the Amazon, and their only purpose is just advertisements and for the 5 richest billionaires to try to establish failed space colonies on the moon or Mars or something. And
yeah,
that's about the best we're going to do.
So let's move on to the next subject, which is Heinz's plan, and his eventual turn, or his being wall broken by his wife. So now we know what she realized at the end. And one thing before I get into it, I thought was interesting is that both Keiko and Luoji had these big realizations as they went into cold, right? So Luoji dropped into the frozen lake, and Keiko was about to be hibernated. So I don't know what it is about cold that makes them have kind of sudden realizations, but that was interesting. I was definitely surprised that his wife was his wall breaker. I don't think there was any signs that I could tell. I was as I was reading it, trying to figure out like that anything that would have given us clues that she's his wall breaker. But anyway, were you guys surprised about that? What do you think about his eventual turn into being an escapist? I mean, I guess that's super surprising that he's an escapist, but it's interesting, like, you know, his flipping the bit plan of, you know, imprinting that into other people as well.
Yeah, I was less surprised by Hines than by who his wall breaker was.
Yeah.
I thought that was a good reveal. I did not expect that, especially again, I wasn't reading it as carefully as you were, Dan, but just through the spoiler cast, I was kind of looking for some of those clues, and I didn't really pick any up either. So I wonder if this was something that he just decided at the last minute to throw in there, or if this was something that was planned all along. But either way, I thought it was a good surprise.
I mean, I guess that's what her like revelation was right before she got frozen, right?
Yeah, I think
She connected all the dots or something with it, and
yeah. So I think like she maybe, I don't know if she knew that the other machines were there, but I think like the thing that she realized and that she said later was like the look in the people's eyes was the same. She knew he was an escapist, right? So she kind of already knew that part by trying to wall break him already. And maybe she knew about the other machines, but she didn't know until she went into hibernation that he actually like flipped the bit and made the other people the same mindset as him, right? And so she said like the look in their eyes like made me realize, and I think that's what she realized as she went into hibernation. She didn't have time before she went into hibernation to
right.
actually say it. Yeah, the one passage I found was when Luigi first meets Hines and he's talking about like, oh, my plan, my spell was a failure and I didn't do anything, you know. And so the passage says Hines displayed the same self-mocking smile that Luigi had just exhibited, and then he shook his head. No, it really hasn't. I know now that after we entered hibernation, research into the human mind quickly encountered an insurmountable obstacle. Going forward meant approaching the quantum level of the brain's thought mechanisms, but at that point, like other science, they hit the impossible so-far barrier. We didn't elevate human intelligence. If I did anything at all, it was just to increase some people's confidence. When Logi entered hibernation, the mental steel had not been developed, and so he didn't really understand the last thing Heinz said, but he noticed that when he said it, a mysterious smile flashed across Kiku Yamasuke's frosty face. She knows at that point, this is before she wall breaking him, she's like, oh yeah, he really imprinted a faith in victory in these guys. Like I know he actually like imprinted an unshakable faith in defeatism and escapism. I think that's the point there that she realized when she went into hibernation.
Yeah.
I want to talk a little about Zhangbei Hai because I've tried, when I first read this this book, like I think that story didn't really resonate with me that much, and I didn't really understand what's happening. So I've been trying to like give hints or like at least kind of bring more focus on that his story is super interesting in the beginning part, because I know it can be a little bit dry. You know, his eventual turn here is like, you know, really abrupt turn is really surprising the whole time. You know, and someone actually had I forgot who it was, but someone actually describes him as the fifth wall facer because he's had like the secret plan that he's not told anybody the entire time, which is eventually to take over a spaceship and then get out of the solar system, because that's the only way that humanity is going to survive, is to not face the Trisolarans. It seems like maybe it's not really needed anymore because, you know, the humanity's progressed so much, and I think Zhang Beihai even says as much. But because he's so staunch in his beliefs that he, you know, the humanity is going to lose, that he still goes through, steals the spaceship, and takes it out of the solar system to help preserve humanity. Hopefully, my kind of hints and prodding has helped a little bit in his understanding of the story.
It was still pretty out of left field for me.
Yeah.
Like my impression is that he was always going to be some sort of wild card, you know, presence, you know, in the future. And I guess I still made the assumption that he was going to be like the guy that like just does the extreme, you know, because he had already done that with murdering the people with the meteorite bullets, you know, like
Yeah.
he was going to be the wild card who does the extreme thing that either like saves the day or like hijacks and like ruins the, you know, the wall facer plan that, you know, gets put into execution, you know, back when I assumed there was going to be a wall facer plan being, you know, put into execution.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, I just kind of had him as the, you know, pegged him as this wild card. So like, but yeah, I mean, his turn was pretty out of left field. Like it could have been anything, you know, just saying like, oh, he's actually the opposite of what he said, you know, all this time. Like there weren't a lot of hits for that. You know, I don't think there were like any hints for that.
No.
So I mean, I think it was a little, yeah, I mean, like a little clumsy in that when something is just that completely out of left field. Didn't really lay the groundwork for that, but curious to see as to where he goes. But
like Tim, I assumed he'd continue to kill and do whatever necessary to meet his goals. So I also thought this was a little abrupt. It wasn't out of character, I guess, but it did seem a little abrupt that this all happened this quickly. So yeah, and I think in general, this is going to be something I bring up on the spoiler cast, but I'm generally confused by where this part of the storyline is supposed to be going relative to what Uoshi and Dashur are doing on Earth.
I mean, the best part is that at least he gives us perspective inside of the, from inside of the cool ships and their cool tech and their,
Yeah.
how they handle 12 G's of force or something by, getting into some fluid and,
I really like that part too. Like I remember when I first watched The Expanse and like they have to like strap into the
Yeah.
seats and they have to get like the fluid into their bodies. Like that reminded me of this part too. And yeah, just like the fact that he takes into account and like you can't just like like the Enterprise just like whatever it goes warp 9.6 and it's like no big deal. And I guess they have the compensators to deal with it, whatever. I'm sure there's some explanation that I don't get. But anyway, like it seems like more grounded in reality here, where they have to go into the deep
Yeah.
sea state to actually even survive that. Yeah, and all those kind of details like was really cool.
I don't know if we get it later in the season, but I like how he describes, like, oh, what would happen to the human body if they weren't in the, in the whatchamacallit, in the pods or something like that. So
Yeah.
I hope that's like inspiration for like the TV series or something like that to give us some good like space gore. Like what the hell? Expanse is pretty good about that in some places, but
yeah.
I don't know what the hell happens to a body that's compressed into the back of the ship. All that.
That part about the pods being filled with the oxygen-rich fluid.
Yeah.
That wasn't that also from the James Cameron movie The Abyss?
Yeah.
Didn't that happen in there as well? That they had the same type of technology.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah, it was breathable fluid, and that both serve to like equalize pressure.
Yep.
Yeah, I think it's cool. Like they talk about like how the people who grew up in the fleet, right? They're like so natural about their movements in space. They can like really make the micro adjustments with their thrusters and like they can kind of more naturally move. Where Zhang Beihai and like the rest of them are really clumsy about like kind of pushing themselves off of walls. Like I thought that was all cool.
Yeah, I mean that's all that stuff is fun. Like like space, space logistics and how life in space, works. I mean, Expanse is pretty good about that too. But and I also like all the descriptions about especially on Earth too. Like, well, everybody has these little like I don't know, little personal helicopters. But,
the bicycles.
yeah, but and I couldn't quite. I mean, I like I'm interested to see some like fan art or concept art or maybe the TV series. Like, I still couldn't get quite a good like mental picture of like the whole underground cities, like other than being like trees with like I kind of pictured like a sci-fi like Mines of Moria or something, except with like houses or buildings sticking out of the side of the pillars with a big artificial sky, I guess. But
yeah, I took it as like I mentioned this in one of the other interviews. Is like if you remember like the Paris casino where it has like the sky kind of painted on there, like that's how I thought of it as like like it's not as realistic, right? Because like now like they said in the book like they took like a picture of the actual sun from above the clouds, right? And it's like a real time thing of there. But anyway, that's how I pictured it. And then they had each tree, like the trunk is like a support for the Unguard city, and then like there's like leaves and branches. So there is some art and some like anime that I've seen, but I would hold off looking at it until after we finish the book because like they show
there's
the
some spoil
yeah
there's gonna be some spoilers in there like
but like
I suspect things aren't quite all as well. I mean as sunny as they seem. I'm not expecting humanity to save the day and live in utopia. Like I'm sure there's some curveballs going to be thrown at us. But I also like and how he kind of describes like the demeanor of all the people that they're all kind of real sunny demeanor and all like really good looking. Like I imagine, and again this is like extrapolating from like how what humanity is like now with social media and all. Like I just imagine this like world full of like Instagram models or something.
Right. Instagrammable clothes, Instagrammable
Yeah.
people. Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought that part of it was really creepy, actually, because
Yeah.
we're not super far away from that today. I mean,
Right.
having every surface be a screen, where that seems expensive right now, but in terms of being monitored and getting personalized information everywhere you go, that seems fairly within reach, unless
Yeah.
I don't know, unless Tim Cook has his way. We're,
Yeah,
we're
like
all,
Logi walking down the street and be like, and there's band characters kind of showing up. I think that shows
yeah,
up in a lot of media, right? Like
yeah.
where, yeah, all these like personalized ads just kind of come in front of you. I mean, some people care about that stuff more than others. Like I probably wouldn't care that much, but I know
Yeah.
I don't think I'm typical around, being creeped out about being tracked by advertisers.
So when you upgraded your iPhone, did you opt into the advertising tracker thing?
I don't I didn't do anything around it. So whatever it was, then
Oh,
I
well,
I, I selected the default.
yeah, I think you're defaulted to opting out, which means you will not get personalized advertisements. So you should go update that setting if you really care.
I don't think I care. I don't care enough to really opt out of everything. I guess like I'm not like
Oh,
looking for it, but
oh, I see.
I don't feel like creeped out like where I have to go through and like make sure like opt out of everything and like I'm never
Oh,
being tracked.
it's not that you like the experience of having very personalized ads. It's that you don't mind the experience of having very personalized ads.
Right. It's more like, whoa, how did they know I was looking at patio furniture or whatever,
Yeah,
right?
see that creeps me out, but that doesn't. You're fine with that. You're like whatever. You
Yeah,
shrug
it
your
just
shoulder. Oh,
doesn't bother me. It doesn't bother me at all.
huh, got it.
So I'm sure like Amazon is tracking this podcast to know that we're into a sci-fi series and will serve me ads based off of you should read whatever next.
You're gonna get a ball of lightning.
Yeah, Ball of Lightning. I'm sure
Yeah.
I'll get a bunch of ads. I'm sure I will because I looked it up on Amazon. So
And Amazon owns Goodreads too now. So, or not now. They have owned them for a while. So
just overall, like it seems like you guys really enjoyed this chapter. Do you hope that it continues like in this kind of vein? Are you looking for, I guess, like what answers are you looking to get answered still?
I honestly hope that when I start reading the next section, we jump another 200 years forward because
Oh yeah.
I feel well. I know there's still some plot lines to close in our current world, but I like Tim said at the very top. I really liked the jump. Um, I thought it was a good way to introduce, basically give the whole book new energy. So
Hmm.
I'm sure that's not going to happen because there are plot points to close up. And again, from the spoiler cast, I think I kind of know what's going to happen next, but I don't want to spoil that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know we have a whole other book to go, so I wouldn't expect another jump right away. And I wouldn't mind camping out here for a bit, just to learn more about the situation here. But yeah, I mirror Amin's sentiment that this was a pretty good refresher, especially considering what the book has been up to this point. Yeah, I mean, I guess with questions, I guess I want answered is what's Luigi's like role in all of this. Like that's the big mystery for me at this moment. This chapter kind of resetted a lot of expectations about how this might play out with with regards to the Trisolarans. Are we overconfident? Will there be a battle? Are the Trisolarans just biding their time, or are they not? They're not all that we thought they were. But yeah, I mean, I suspect that's what the third book is the humanity and the Trisolarans finally coming together or something,
Hmm.
and whatever there ensues between them. But yeah, maybe he's throwing me for for a loop. Like maybe we'll never meet the Trisolarans. Maybe it's all about something else. I don't know.
All right. Well, thank you for listening. Please check out rehydrate.space for released episodes, reading lists, pronunciation guides, and any other information about the podcast that's coming up. And please leave comments by emailing us at rehydrate@festmail.com or on Twitter at rehydratepod. And please join us next time for episode 5, Droplet, covering the second third of part 3. Check the reading list for page numbers. It's confusing, I know. Yeah, Leocean, please don't do this for future books. Make it easier. I mean, I've been breaking out the reading list for Death's End coming up, and it's easier, but it's also harder in a different way. Anyway, I wish they would just have numbered chapters to make podcast life easier. Anyway, please check the reading list on Rehydrate.space for the actual sections we should be reading and the page numbers and the ending line. The ending line ends with "they quietly disappeared into the eternal night." So look for that. And that's where you should stop for the next episode. Thank you for listening.